just foreground was to foreground these issues and problematics. So this is a diptych that I did inside the Pitt Rivers Museum, where I got into one of their display cases, which happened to be empty, which was a very interesting process of negotiation. And I got into the vitrine with a replica of Pitt Rivers P53 Enfield rifle, two breadfruit, which is an incredibly important plant in the history of plant collecting and colonialism, because it was taken from Tahiti to the Caribbean to feed slaves, and the Bible being so essential along with firearms in the actual establishment of colonialism. So it's a double diptych. Could go to the next slide. Oh, right, we haven't got the other side of the picture, but there are two parts of the picture, and it's meant to raise questions about gender and race. So the other part of the picture is a white female person in the same position with the same objects, and it's asking questions about gender and race in relation to the history of our colonial collections. The other project, which was also done in 2019, was a Friday night late at the Wellcome Collection in London. And the Wellcome Collection is one of the museums that has been most engaged with us as Culturand in terms of employing our trainees, but also working with them on co-curating this program. Now, as Cyborg, the idea of the cyborg raises a lot of really interesting questions about African heritage, because the word itself was invented by an African-American writer called Octavia Butler in a science fiction trilogy that she wrote in the 1960s. The word is meant to mean a kind of amalgam of human, machine, and animal. And it was very important for us to interrogate this idea at the Wellcome Collection, which is a medical collection, also with the colonial heritage. And to raise the idea of looking at the concept of cyborg was to say, what do we become when our bodies are technologically enhanced? What happens to our gender, our race, our sexuality, our identity? And so the whole program was a series of interventions by artists, academics, writers, filmmakers. And the picture that you can see here is the trans performance artist, Rebecca Ubuntu, who did an incredible performance there. So this was an example of the kind of public programs that we do with museum and heritage collections, and to raise many different issues about the nature of museums, the nature of collections, to look at cultural identity and the history of the way that racial difference and other differences have been understood by museums. So the next part of this is talking about the new museum school, which delivers on our workforce training, and is not separate to these public programs that I've just talked about. So our new museum school alumni are the talent that we use in delivering these public programs. So the Welcome one, we worked with new museum school trainees as well. So we have been for the past 7 years running a diploma program in which we've trained 134 young people from diverse backgrounds. 74% of these trainees found full-time employment in the sector within 6 months of graduating, and the program includes a heritage diploma in conservation, collections management, digitization, public engagement, and also traditional skills in the restoration of heritage. So we've developed a really rich consortium of national, regional, and local partners who've committed themselves to diversity in terms of workforce and investing in new skills to tackle sector shortages and access a new generation of talent. And this has provided a fresh, diverse pipeline of workforce to the arts and heritage sector. So that's the diploma program, which, and I'm now going to go on to the advanced program. So the reason why we decided to do the advanced program and discontinue the diploma program is because of the research that we carried out with our alumni, but also that has been published recently, like the Panic report that Create London put out, talking about how the workforce is still stuck. The museum and heritage and the arts workforce, diverse people are still stuck in the lower ranks of the workforce. They're not getting progression up to senior levels. So we felt that we needed to help our graduates with the tools that would help them to advance. And one of the main things they came back with when we did the survey is they want a postgraduate qualification. So what we're aiming to do is to set up a gold standard postgraduate program that will enable entry-level professionals to train up and support their progression in the sector. We're doing this, by the way, with the University of Leicester, the Museum Studies, the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries, and we've had support from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And so this is going to start in the next academic year. And so we think this will provide an opportunity to drive a movement of inclusive transformation within the sector and allow young professionals to continue full-time employment while attending distance learning. So they'll be able to do flexible modular course structure leading to either postgraduate qualifications in terms of PG dip to MA level, and they could even go on to PhD if they so desire. So we're very proud of this. We're actually recruiting, as I speak, we're selecting the applicants for this advanced program, and we're very excited to be going ahead. It's going to have 15 places per year over the next year. And the other thing that's really exciting about this is we're developing a partnership with the Sotheby's Institute of Art. And that's going to be a contemporary art pathway. And we find that to be, it's a very important thing for us to be doing, because we need to diversify the private sector, which is where the Sotheby's people go to. And so we're developing a partnership with them where we will have an MA contemporary pathway in that school. So over to Svetlana now.
Thank you so much, Errol. And just to share with everyone, over the past year, we have done a lot of work as well as part of our remit of opening up the arts and heritage sector to more diverse people. I think in response to the terrible murder of George Floyd last year, we worked very closely with our new museum school trainees to develop a Black Lives Matter charter for the UK heritage sector. We worked very closely with our trainees on the language on that and what it would include, and it really was basically a guide and a call to action to museums and heritage organizations in the sector to go beyond their words of support that they gave for Black Lives Matter and to really turn those words of support into action. So the charter included various points, including looking at the decolonization of collections through reinterpretation and contextualization of their objects and histories, considering restitution and repatriation and the processes for that, and encouraging organizations to look into that in more detail. Encouraging organizations to think about the diversity of their staff and looking to have better representation at all levels of their organizations. Looking at diversity in commissioning and those processes, and also just simply, looking to put in more policies that protect and support their Black staff. And I think we had a really great response to the charter, I think, in the media and in the public. I think the day it went out, we had numerous calls to the office with people, sharing their experiences, people talking about objects that they had in their collection and trying to figure out how to sort of give them back if they wanted to. So I think it was a really positive moment for us as a charity, and I think it was really sort of well received by our friends and partners as well. Then more recently this year, we decided to host a joint event with Museums Association last month, actually, called Museums and Black Lives Still Matter. And that conversation really looked at exploring how museums have responded in the last year to racism and what needs to happen next. So we basically brought together speakers and leaders from the UK and the US for this sort of transatlantic moment of reflection. Again, sort of looking at all of these statements of solidarity that people shared and, what their achievements have been and what basically more changes that need to be made. So some of our panelists included Arikate Oke, who's the Managing Director at Black Cultural Archives, Hassan Mahamdali, who's a diversity specialist, and Rachel Mano, who's on the decolonization group, who's the chair, sorry, of the decolonization group at the Museums Association. And then we also had speakers, Monica Montgomery from the Smithsonian, and Ian DeMont Martin from the Art Institute of Chicago. So I think for us, going forward, just sort of given our remit to open up the sector more, I think we will continue to work with our partners and our allies to continue to push for change and to continue to keep the conversation alive and going. And we very much hope everyone in the audience, will reach out to us and get in touch if you have any questions or may need any sort of advice on sort of looking at diversifying your respective organizations. So that was just a quick summary from us. And if you want to hear a little bit more about our work and our projects, just visit our website and follow us on social media.
Perfect. Thank you both so much for that. As it's going to be the final time today I say this, if anyone has any questions, if you just want to pop them in the chat along with your name and organization, we will get to those right at the end. In the meantime, I found that fascinating. I have loads of questions, I'm sorry. But to start with, like feeding on from what you just said there, Svetlana, how do heritage organizations go about starting this process? If they feel passionately that they want to decolonize in any way, shape or form, what is the first steps? I know obviously you've launched the charter, but how would you advise people on starting that whole process?
I would say start the process by looking at your business plan, looking at what your current objectives look like, what your future plans look like, and trying to build decolonization and diversity into those plans. I would suggest putting in sort of measurable objectives and outcomes that you'd like to see achieved as an organization, whether it's in 3 years or 5 years' time. And that might look like saying, okay, in 3 years' time, we'd like X percentage of our staff to reflect the diversity of the UK population. Or it might look like we want to look at recontextualizing some of our collections. We want to maybe focus on the next 3 years on this specific time period. I think I'd also say there's, like Culture and we obviously offer lots of consultancy, but there are many other DEI consultants out there who can really help you. I think obviously it's quite difficult knowing where to start, but I think maybe, if you reach out to someone and get their sort of support, they would be able to share, ideas and tips for where to begin as well, and how you might be able to really build out a clear strategy of diversifying your sort of organization. Errol, I don't know if you had anything else to add there?
I think you've covered it pretty well, Svetlana. I would only add that we have a kind of model and realization for tackling diversity in the private sector, the business case for diversity, and I really think that organizations should visit this and look at how in the business sector it's pretty well, we've got a lot of evidence for this, that diverse organizations are more successful, financially more successful. And I think that that's actually just translated to the arts and heritage sector in terms of satisfaction of the workforce and the expansion of audiences, that diversity is going to lead to more successful organizations. I think that's a mindset that people must get into as a positive way, not this is a problem that we've got to deal with, but it's actually an opportunity to develop the organization, to make it more relevant both to the workforce and the audience. And that brings real tangible benefits creatively and in terms of, metrics in audiences and staff satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. We've had a question pop up in the chat. It's from Manasi at History Speak. And it says, as an independent culture charity based in England, could you please comment on the government's retain and explain law and position on contested heritage? How do you see this affecting decolonization efforts made by museums? This was something I was going to ask you about myself, so thank you very much for that question. And I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Okay, do you want me to kick this off? Right, well, let's unpick this. This policy is not coming from a good place, okay? There's been a kind of what I see as quite a desperate pushback from the government, especially following the events of last summer. And, you know, we've had direct intervention into museums' response to monuments and statues, and you know, so it's actually, what's gone on is beyond retain and explain, because some of the examples that let's name the department, DCMS, has objected to, for example, when the statue of Hans Sloane was moved at the British Museum, or there was the issue at the Museum of the Home with the statue of Geoffrey. In neither case were they planning to dispose of these objects. They wanted to move them and to recontextualize them, and the government got involved. So I actually think that the behavior of DCMS has gone far beyond actually what this phrase retain and explain means. They've got involved in the direct curatorial decisions of decision-making, of museums' decision-making. It's very disturbing to have that kind of intervention from a democratic government actually into cultural decision-making. I would say though that I think I'm still optimistic about the future, and despite all these strictures that are coming out from the government, my experience of working with the sector is that people working in museums, they do want to recontextualize objects, they do want to deal with restitution, and governments are only temporary, and I predict that within our lifetimes this whole thing is going to change actually, because there's such a clamour for us to address these problematic past and these difficult objects and provenances.
Svetlana, did you want to add anything?
I think Errol covered most of it, but I definitely do agree that I think, as we've seen, especially over the past year with the pandemic, our sector is very resilient and creative. And I think that they come up with really inventive ways of working around problems. And this is obviously an issue and a challenge for them. And I think we have seen so many museums and heritage organizations have a strong and passionate desire to diversify their staff and their collections. I think, you know, I am also very positive that they will continue to do that work regardless of, you know, challenges that they might be facing from the government as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We've got two more questions just popped up in the chat. If just before we go to those, there's a really brief follow-up. We earlier in one of our sessions this morning had Sir Jeff Palmer talking about his role chairing the independent steering group, which has been called on by the Scottish government to look into the way museums represent the past, however uncomfortable those pasts may be. I just wondered, obviously that's a very different approach, and it's keeping things sort of firmly at arm's length. Do you think that's about as close as government should get? Because like Errol, obviously you said effectively these are curatorial decisions that some people in Whitehall are trying to get involved in.
Yeah, I think they should just, you know, why do you employ directors of museums and curators of museums to actually, you know, work with objects and to position them and explain them? And I think they should be allowed to get on with their work. You know, it's just not in the remit of the spirit of the arm's length relationship between departments like DCMS and our museums. You know, it's really upsetting, that relationship. You know, we had that, you know, Chris Smith and Ed Vasey, former Secretaries of State for Culture, making a joint statement saying this was really a bad development, you know. So I think that the government really needs to, it shows a kind of defensiveness. I don't think it shows confidence at all, actually, that they feel that they need to intervene, up to the point of, you know, denying Mary Beard onto the board of, you know, and getting involved in appointments of, you know, of people on boards that they think their views are, you know, to be challenged. You know, it's a very disturbing development.
Absolutely, and I think also they should be having a supportive role, you know, in public institutions and supporting the work that they're doing, rather than trying to be counterproductive and sort of detract from that. So I think hopefully in the coming years, we will see a bit more support for this kind of work and for unveiling the histories and the truths that have not really been sort of in the public domain for centuries. And I think it's really important and crucial work that needs to be done. And I think, you know, lots of organizations will continue to push for this change, despite, you know, all of these developments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both for that. We'll move on to the next questions that are in the chat. The first one is from Roz at Southwest Museum Development, and both her questions are to do with the new museum school. She asks, will you bring back the Cultural Heritage Diploma to be delivered alongside the postgraduate qualifications? And her second question is regarding the assessment process for the postgraduate qualification. She says, what type of assessment are you using?
Okay, well, I must say the context of this development of this diploma, the postgraduate program is also, I have to admit, involves my own lived experience as well, right? As a Black professional, I first started managing these sorts of schemes in 2007 when I was at the Arts Council. We were running the Inspire curatorial program, and there has been a habit of organizations running entry-level schemes, which is what we regard the diploma program to be, and then leaving it, right, or discontinuing it, and you know, if they stop-start, you know, these sorts of schemes. The lived experience part of this is I can vouch for how my career changed when I decided to do an MA, right? It really is, you know, it transformed my view of myself, and how I could relate to white colleagues, you know, who had gone to the Courtauld or whatever and were working alongside, and it gave me a confidence. And I know the trainees, when they fed back in their in the survey, they were talking about going to interviews to jobs which did not demand an MA, and being asked at the interview, are you planning to do one, right? So it's a real issue to actually give people from diverse Black backgrounds higher education qualification from the best institution possible, because we know that that's going to help them through. And the University of Leicester School for Museum Studies is, you know, internationally renowned for the quality of its work. And that's why we're sticking with that postgraduate pathway rather than repeating more diploma programs. That's the thinking behind it, and we think that there's evidence for it, both in terms of lived experience and the research data about the arts and heritage workforce. The type of assessment that we're using would be the normal academic assessment that, you know, in a postgraduate qualification. If you're speaking about Leicester, the MA, you know, it's the usual way that you know, essays and research projects would be conducted. There's an additional thing actually with the MA that we've put in, which is a research project, a project in practice, it's going to be called. And we've managed to get buy-in from the sector, where sector partners, this is museums and arts organizations, are going to sponsor each one of the students to do a research project in practice at their institution that tackles some of the key themes that Svetlana has been talking about, which is in terms of workforce, interpreting collections, looking at provenance. So we're going to get this buy-in from the sector. So that's slightly different. It will impact on the assessment process, because this involves a real engagement with an employer during the period of the academic program.
Svetlana, did you have anything to add, or?
No, I think Errol covered everything for that one.
With the next question we've got, and thank you, Ross, for that question. The next question we've got is from Sally from the Scottish Parliament, who asks, how do we involve communities who feel our spaces are not for them in creating the spaces and telling the stories they care about in ways that work for them? Are there any bright examples that you would point to?
I would probably say looking at developing, which I'm sure you already have, a community outreach program. So that might look like inviting members from the community for maybe like a breakfast morning, to sort of, you know, into your space, to experience the space. I think you could think about, you know, setting up like an ambassador program with people from the local area as well. And, you know, using their voices and their profiles, they would be able to, you know, spread the word about, you know, the mission and vision of your organization. And they might be able to encourage other people in the community to come in. And I think it's also simply thinking about the look and feel of your organization and ensuring that, you know, for example, like security guards are briefed, you know, accordingly. So many people talk about their experiences of going into a museum and, you know, being kind of followed by the security guards, or, you know, being mistaken for somebody that they're not. So I think it's thinking, you know, quite carefully about the entire feel of your organization as well, like from the security guards upwards, from the front of house staff as they greet people. How can you sort of build that welcoming environment to all visitors, and ensuring that it does feel like a welcoming and inclusive place, I think is something to think about as well. Al, I don't know if you have any like examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head at the minute.
Yeah, just to add to what Svetlana, I just want to point out actually that Historic Environment Scotland is one of the partners in the Advanced New Museum School. So we will be able to demonstrate in practice actually how we can engage communities. But I just want to say, as a person of Jamaican heritage, how close the narrative of many of our colonies is with Scottish history. My mother's maiden name is McGregor, right? There are so many Scottish names in Jamaica, and we, along with Scotland, have the saltire in the flag. You know, there are so many exciting stories to tell about Scottish history, Scottish industry, and Scottish culture, and how it is how it was globalized through the empire. And I think retelling these stories and acknowledging these histories is a way of engaging with communities and the different communities that have settled in Scotland. It's a wonderful opportunity to enrich the narrative that the museums can construct about our history.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, Sally is very grateful for that response I see in the chat. One of the other questions I wanted to ask, if we just go back to the education side of things, obviously New Museum School, I think Errol, if I'm not wrong, you said 15 graduates every year, sort of roughly is which obviously is great that the 15 people there are going to get these postgraduate qualifications and hopefully be able to get into more senior roles. But how do you think the sector at large can address this? Because obviously 15 people each year is not making a significant enough change, is it? And how do you think the sector at large should deal with this as an issue?
Yeah, well, it's a model that can be scaled up, first of all. And I also don't want to estimate what 15 in a really culturally a monocultural environment is a huge number. And, you know, they can be spread all over the country. If we're talking about growing future directors, future senior curators, I think that's quite a good start. And what we're doing is demonstrating a model that could be replicated. So I agree, you know, we'd like to be doing 40 or 50, but it's incredibly expensive for a small charity like us. It's costing us the best part of £500,000 to do this program, and in these straitened times, it's a bit tricky. But what I would also say is that museums have the ability to attract large amounts of capital, actually, from donors, and you see these huge capital projects. So I had a conversation in Bristol, and we were talking about investment in this, and you know, I think it was £100 million was being invested in doing up a concert hall, right? And what I said to the city council was, well, in terms of investment priorities, what are we doing here? You know, how much would it cost? You know, like £500,000, £1 million? to actually, so it's about prioritizing. And so we're offering a model. And I think if the sector comes on board, we can make this a much bigger program, actually, but it needs the will to actually commit the resources to making this happen.
Yeah, and just to add to what Errol said, I think it's also about organizations looking quite closely at their recruitment and retention policies and probably dusting them off and looking to update them a bit more. I think especially in the arts, as we all know, a lot of opportunities are sort of between friends, between people in your network, and that's how people get jobs. But I think it's about thinking about having probably a bit more of an open recruitment process, looking at diversifying the recruiters and headhunters that you are using. I think if you're going to Sally every year and you've been doing that for the past 30 years, she probably isn't the best person to advise you on, reaching a diverse audience. It's thinking about looking at new ways in which you can, reach out to those audiences and get them to apply to your roles. I think that is like another comment and challenge that we've heard, is that people just don't really know where to go to reach those people. But there are, recruiters and headhunters out there who can, be that sort of middle person for you, and get a broader range of people applying for your roles. I think it's also thinking about marketing, and where you're advertising your roles, where is it going, and who is actually seeing it. Again, if you've been using one means of advertising for the last 20 years, it might be time to think differently about that and find like another route, another magazine or another publication who might attract a more diverse audience that you could reach. So I think there's lots of ways that people can think about recruiting and retaining staff. And I think on the retention side, again, as I mentioned, it is about creating an inclusive and welcoming environment and ensuring that your HR policies reflect that. I think some of the challenges that we've sort of heard from our trainees and other people of color that we know in the sector is that it's great once you get your foot in the door, it's amazing. But then, sometimes you don't really get the support that you need to really flourish and develop in that role. And so it's thinking about, how can you sort of retain your Black or POC staff? What can you do to support them and help them to sort of grow and develop in your organization? So I think there's lots of considerations to be made there as well.
Thank you for that. And I wonder, I don't think we've got any more questions in the chat. I was just wondering, obviously we're talking about people from diverse backgrounds reaching senior roles in the heritage sector, and obviously you, Svetlana, as Vice Chair of Culture are a shining example of that. And I wondered if you could just sort of talk a little bit about your experience to date and how you feel about having that role and what you hope to achieve.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. Actually, it is really such a huge honor to have been appointed Vice Chair of the board. As we have been talking about, these opportunities are few and far between, and there aren't many young women of color, or even young people of color in general, who are given these kinds of opportunities to lead at a senior level. So I am very grateful to have this opportunity and to be able to bring my experience in cultural communications and strategy to help support the growth and development of culture. And I think my vision is to really, work, as we've already started to do, work really closely with Errol and work closely with our newly appointed chair, Miranda Lowe, to really push for change in the sector through our programming, through our network, and through our platform, to really result in hopefully creating a more inclusive and diverse arts and culture sector that is truly representative of the UK population, particularly here in London. So I think, for the next 3 years, we're going to be working really hard to roll out our New Museum School Advanced program, like Errol talked about, and really to continue to partner with people like yourselves and Museums Association to continue pushing for change.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. As I say, I don't think we've got any more questions at the minute in the chat. And so given that it is 20 to 6 on a Wednesday, I'm sure everyone would probably like to get to their evenings. So as I mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded and it will be uploaded in the coming weeks. So everyone who's been on this session can watch it back, and we anticipate plenty of people will be watching it afterwards. So hello to all you watching it in the future. But thank you so much to Errol and Svetlana. It's been really great to talk to you and to hear more about the charity. And yeah, as I say, I hope everyone has a nice evening, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow for the rest of the talks.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you very much.